Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second week of an introduction to the world of Mussar, the second installment of our 5-part series on the Mussar Movement, part of the Winter Beis Medrash series. Thank you, everyone who has their videos on. I think it adds a lot to this year. I understand if you can't put it on, totally understand. But if you could, I think it adds a lot to the general feel, and everyone should feel welcome to chime in and to ask questions. So welcome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share with the link to the source sheet with you, and that way you can follow along more easily. If I see that more people join, I will drop it in the chat again. But here's the source sheet just for now. And then I can add it again. Oh, here someone's just logging in right now, so I'll wait a moment. Okay, there's the source sheet. You take a click, and then we will begin momentarily. Okay, so what I want to focus on tonight is the first generation students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and primarily on the school of Kelm. I want to show you also some photographs that I was able to find. This is a picture of, I believe, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's son. I don't think there's any authentic picture that at least I could find of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter himself. This is what I could find of Rabbi Yitzchak Lipkin, and you see the proper dress and the top hat, and this is from 1905, at least what I can find on the internet. And then you can see on your source sheet, there's also a picture. I'll share my screen for a moment so that you can see it. There's a picture of Rav Yitzchak Peterberger, depending on how you pronounce it, Rav Yitzchak Blazer. So let me just share my screen for a moment and I'll show you him. He's probably one of the most primary students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Here's a picture of him. One of the very few pictures we have of that period when he was in Israel, as you can see sort of that, Jerusalem stone. And we will discuss 3 major students focusing.
We're just seeing your screen. We're not seeing the photo.
1 second. Let me try. Let me try to share it again. Give me a second. Okay, let me share it again. Share screen. Here. You see him now?
Yes.
So this is Yitzchak Blazer, the Mussar Movement's great historian. That the reason why people refer to him as that is he wrote down much of what we know. He wrote down Or Yisrael, which are the letters from Rabbi Yisrael Salanter to his students, as well as a biography on Rabbi Yisrael Salanter in the beginning, called Kochlei Or, in the beginning of Or Yisrael. And this is a very rare picture from that time period, but it's very, I thought it shows you sort of that personality. And then I will show you a picture of one of the other students, Rabbi Naftali Amsterdam. I think we do not have any pictures of the other great student of Rabbi Yisrael, Rav Simcha Zissel Breide, the Alter of Kelm, who we will discuss momentarily. But I just wanted to show you some of those photographs. You can see them on your source sheet as well. Okay. I noticed that some people joined recently, so I'm going to post the source sheet again in the chat. Here we go. I want to begin tonight actually by sharing a story with you that I heard recently, and it was very impactful to me, and I think it really speaks to what the students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and specifically the Kelm school of thought, how they focus their energies and their avodas Hashem. So I heard this from Yisrael Besser, who is a author and a writer, and he is involved with Mishpacha magazine. So there was a there was a prominent rabbi in the tri-state area who had a congregant that was struggling in their marriage. And he suggested to this congregant that he felt he should meet with Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, right? Actually, someone who grew up in Toronto, right? Yitzchak alumnus. And so he said, I think you should speak with Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. I think you would gain from that encounter. And this man made an appointment with Rav Shmuel at 5 p.m. this past Sunday. And he drives to Rav Shmuel's house, and it's 5 o'clock. He's on time. And Rav Shmuel, he comes in, he meets him, he greets him, and he says, Rav Shmuel asks him, do you mind can you do me a favor? I have to visit someone in the hospital. Would you mind if we have our conversation in the car? Would that be okay with you? And the fellow says, of course, I don't mind. I could drive the Rosh Hashiva to the hospital. Thank you so much. They go in a car and they get to the hospital, and he says, I'm so sorry. I just need to make this visit. And when I come back, we'll just continue the conversation. So Rav Shmuel takes about an hour. He goes in, comes back after about an hour, and he comes back into the car and he says, I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. I had to say goodbye to my wife. And he stops for a moment and he says, I now have no obligation, as my Shalom Bayis is ending. My obligations of Shalom Bayis are ending. So now yours are beginning, and let us have this conversation now. How can I be of help? I thought that was just a tremendous story in its own right. I mean, there's a lot to be said about it, but one thing you see from the story is that focus and that presence of mind that Rav Shmuel had, and that he was trying to. I don't think it was in no way a gesture of gaiva, of haughtiness. He really felt very strongly that he, I don't know if he would have taken any other appointment, but he felt Shalom Bayis is going to take that appointment, and he had to say goodbye to his wife, but he felt in total control, and he was able to help another person in a situation where many people, there would be hysterics, there wouldn't be, you wouldn't have sort of that focus of mind. And for me, that depicts the school of Mussar, and specifically, I'll talk about this more length, the school of Kelm. Now, Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, his father, Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, studied in Slobodka, which is a somewhat different school of thought, but it's still, as we'll soon see, it all comes from Kelm. It all starts with the Kelm. So, before we get to Kelm specifically, I want to highlight the 3 primary students of Rabbi Yisrael. We already mentioned them, but I'll list them again. We have Rav Simcha Zissel Breine, who then later took his mother's name, Ziv. He becomes the alter of Kelm. We'll talk about what the word alter means coming up. Then we have Rav Yitzchak Blazer, or Rav Itzela Peterburger, like we mentioned before. He was a very prominent Rav in Peterburg and St. Petersburg, and then Rav Naftali Amsterdam. Rav Yitzchak Blazer, I want to talk about him for a moment. Rav Yitzchak Blazer was just completely on fire. I mean, this person, in every situation in the Hebrew calendar, they talk about how he would act completely different in every appropriate occasion. He would act differently. On Purim, he would be dancing in the streets, he would be singing, and it would be, you could see on his person just the joy and the excitement. And then in Elul, they said if you didn't see Rav Yitzchak Blazer on Elul, you had no idea what true fear was. And he would tremble and he would shake. And there were very famous lectures he would give, and people would talk about it for years and years afterwards, that they saw Rav Yitzchak Blazer, Rav Itzela, they saw him during Elul. And during Elul, he was a different man. And he was a person who was 100% committed at every different point in the Hebrew calendar. He was committed to that theme, and he was committed to that mood, and you could see it on his person. And he had a very close childhood friend named Naftali Amsterdam. I assume he came from Amsterdam. And they would do something which I would not try at home, but it's something just to get a sense of their their sense of their aspirations and their altruism. They would literally send themselves into galus, into exile, and they would dress as regular people. They would go around without any plans, without any money, without any particular destinations, as a Mussar exercise. They were exercising something which it takes an effort just to appreciate what they were doing, because we have an initial this idea sort of repels us, or it's totally abhorrent to us. But if we think about it, just to understand where these people were coming from, I think we could understand somewhat of what they were doing. They were these prominent Talmidei Chachamim, part of a new, let's say, school of thought, and they wanted to make sure to note to themselves internally that this has not gone to their head. This is not something that is becoming sort of this elitism, and we have the truth and other people don't know. And they wanted to make sure that they stayed true to their values. And they would literally sit at beggars' lines like we would have today, like soup kitchens, and they would collect money. And they learned by that experience what it meant to be completely dependent both on people and on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that was a practice that they had for many years. And they would go together. These two beggars who were really these great rabbis, but you would never know if you had seen them in the street. Another thing that I want to mention about Rav Yitzchak is that he was childless for 35 years. 35 years he was childless. And in those times, according to halacha, and especially the Moors of those days, it would not be uncommon for Rav Yitzchak to have divorced his wife. I'm not condoning that. I'm just saying that was the reality of that society. However, he never brought up that topic. He never even engaged in that possibility until his own wife brought that up. She brought it up. She asked him, maybe you should find someone else to marry, and maybe you can have children. And in fact, he did after 35 years. And he married a young widow, and she had 4 children, and he raised these children as his own children. And he and his second wife had their own 4 children. But even as an old man, he would wake up in the middle of the night with the kids. I mean, again, this is totally out of the context of the society they were living in. He would help with the children. He treated all of them as equals. He did not favor his own over the others. He totally blended the families. And it's something that is just incredible to think about, 35 years of marriage and then sort of creating a new family. And this personality of just tremendous righteousness and truth, striving to be the best person that he could be. Rav Naftali Amsterdam wrote many letters. He was, as we mentioned, he was another student of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and they were very close, Rav Yitzchak and Rav Naftali. And Rav Naftali emphasized the importance of friendship. He actually writes, very important to learn Mussar, very important to have friends. And that was a very important piece of his picture of the Mussar goals, the goals in self improvement and working on character traits, was very much centered around his relationships and his own experience with this sort of special group that they had, and friendship that both he and Rav Yitzchak enjoyed. An interesting fact, a Yeshiva University fun fact, Dr. Bernard Dov Revel, the founder of Yeshiva College, the first dean, Rosh Yeshiva, is a Talmud of Rav Yitzchak Blazer. He studied under Rav Yitzchak Blazer and the Kovna Kollel. As I mentioned, Rav Yisrael Salanter was very instrumental in establishing that Kovna Kollel. That was one of his initial projects, but it was not for a long period. But Dr. Bernard Revel, Dov Revel, was in fact a student of Rav Yitzchak Blazer. So even Yeshiva University can find parts of its roots that go back to the Mussar movement. One of the mashgichim, and we'll talk about this when we get to the Slabodka school, Rav Yaakov Moshe Lesson, one of the early mashgichim, he was also from the world of Slabodka and the Mussar world. So as I mentioned, every institution was really very much shaped and influenced by the students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. Even though, as we mentioned, his life ended in a certain tragedy. In a certain way, his legacy was lived out by his students and by their students. I want to move to a second part, which I want to focus on the third, we'll call the third student, but not in any particular order, Rav Simcha Zissel Breide, the author of Kelm. I wanted to show you some pictures that I have. I'll share my screen. Some pictures I have of the students that came out of the yeshiva of Kelm. So this was Rav Daniel Mavshevitz. Rav Daniel, who was murdered at the hands of the Nazis in 1941, was the last sort of leader, religious figure in the yeshiva in Kelm. Rav Eliyahu Eliezer Dessler, very well known as the Mashkiach in Panovich, he studied in Kelm, and we'll talk about Rav Dessler. And Rav Yerucham Levovitz, the famed Mashkiach of the Mir Yeshiva, also studied in Kelm, and he brought the worlds of Mir and Mussar together, and by that bridging many different worlds, and he developed many special approaches in the Mussar, in philosophy of Mussar, and in Das Torah, one of his works in Das Chachmul Mussar, he develops different theses of Mussar in a very systematic and elegant way in prose, and that is not generally found early. It's a rarity, and his work is very fundamental, and I think he was also very instrumental in the publications of his Rebbe, the author of Kelm, Rav Simcha Zissel Breide. I will now stop sharing my screen. And we'll continue. Okay. So those are just some pictures of the personalities of people who studied in Kelm. But what was Kelm? What exactly was it, and how was it so influential on the lives of its students? So Kelm was the first Mussar yeshiva. It wasn't a large place, probably around 30 or 40 students. It began really in the lower ages. It was really a Talmud Torah of sorts. And the altar of Simcha Zissel Breide was at its helm. Now, I want to just take a moment to talk about the word altar. Altar, some have the mistaken understanding of the word altar as being elderly, like an alter bacher or someone who's old. But the word, according to Rav, I think it's Rabbi Yonason Rosenblum, he wrote a work on Rabbi Yaakov, the biography on Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, the art school biography, and he says that the word alter literally means elder, but in practice, in the Mussar movement, it had nothing to do with age. The Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, who became the alter of Slobodka in his 30s, was referred to as the alter. The alter really was sort of the leader, the spiritual father, so to speak, of their whichever school we're referring to. So it really had nothing to do with age. In Kelm, it was the
elder.
The elder, but they could have been young, like Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, the alter of Slobodka, became the alter in his 30s. So, maybe he looked really old. I don't know, but it was more of a honorific, a sort of a stature. We would maybe call it a mashkiach ruchani, but that is really a function of the Mussar movement. These titles like a mashpia is really more Hasidish, but all these they're not necessarily specific positions dedicated to teaching text, right? That's the point. They're kind of these, we'll call them maybe a director or a spiritual guide or however you want to call it. They're not just there to teach the lecture, teach the class. So every school of Mussar basically had an altar. There's the altar of Navardik, the altar of Kelm, and the altar of Slobodka. Those are the three major schools of Mussar, and I would like to focus on the first one tonight with you, and that is the school of Kelm. Kelm, not to be confused with Chelm. Chelm are those jokes people make about these people who are just totally backwards. I have a suspicion. I cannot confirm this, and I actually think someone told me it's not true, but I'll just tell you anyways. I believe that the Maskilim poked fun at the Mussar movement. As I mentioned to you, Rabbi Yisrael took on one of his missions in his movement was to combat the Maskilim, the Enlightenment, the Haskalah. And I have a hunch, it's honestly just a speculation, so I can't tell you for sure. But I wonder if they sort of poked fun, as people poke fun at whatever, denomination or minority, or whatever they want to sort of beat down. They made fun of Kelm by calling it Kelm. And in Kelm, they don't know what they're doing, and they're just sitting around and singing songs. And that was, it's possible that all the Kelm jokes really began with Kelm, but it has no bearing on reality. In Kelm, they were very, very committed to their studies. They were very bright people. We'll see, actually, they studied secular subjects. So one of the things that I could tell you about Kelm, that's what I wanted to share with you about that Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky story, was sort of this refinement of personality, this regalness. They conducted themselves like aristocrats of spirit. They really were immaculately dressed. There was a very high emphasis on physical appearance, to look presentable. And there was this sense that they are the elite. And I mentioned to you before that at a certain point in Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's career, he exerted effort to build a sort of smaller group of students and influence those students. This was the model of Kelm. Kelm was never a large place. I don't know if it was by design or they just didn't have any money and whatever, but it was never a large place. But everyone there was of a very high quality, very high caliber, disciplined, punctual, very neat, self-confident, intellectually advanced. This was sort of the pinnacle of the Mussar personality would go to Kelm. Now, as I mentioned to you, the altar of Kelm was at the helm of the institution. But there were other figures that I think their description also gives you a sense and a flavor of what the educational philosophy of Kelm was. So I'll mention some of the names. We've already talked about some of them. Rav Dessler, Rav Nathan C. Finkel, who becomes the altar of Slobodka, studied first in Kelm. As we mentioned, Rav Yerucham Levovitz and Rav Daniel Mavshevitz. So another personality, which is one of the sources in your source sheet, his name was Rav Ben Sion Zev Krenitz. And he was a model of Kelm. This is a translation of a description from Tenuas HaMussar. And I'll just read some of it here. It gives you a flavor of the personality of people there. He was pleasing physically, tall, elegant, handsome, meticulous in dress and entire appearance, wondrously controlled in every action, courteous and pleasant. His whole personality radiating charm and dignity. He was pleasing internally, overflowing with goodness and kindness, showing love and friendly countenance to everyone, possessing exemplary qualities, noble in spirit, gentle in soul, aware of his purpose in life, and marching confidently towards his realization. Always working on himself, preparing, improving, ascending. This was a sort of the picture that I have of Kelm, is like these very self-confident, regal figures that were always working on themselves. And there was another part of their educational philosophy, which fits with this sort of the disciplined perspective, is growth step by step. There was nothing more to the dislike of the students in Kelm, where someone would take on something, whatever it is, some righteous act or chumrah that they felt was inappropriate for their stage. You go through growth step by step, and everything has to grow in an orderly, disciplined fashion. So, for example, they would emphasize, and apparently Rav Yerucham did this for many years, thinking about one subject for 5 minutes at a time. 5 minutes to dwell on one idea, not for the mind to wander. And then, so if you try that exercise, it's very difficult. Just to focus on one particular idea for 5 minutes at a time. Then the next time you do 6 minutes, then 7 minutes, and so on. To go ahead and to decide, I'm going to study for the next 3 hours straight. Unheard of. You don't do that out of the blue. Growth happens in stages. Another idea that, another story that highlights this concept. There's a story told about Rav Dessler, who was once on a train ride with Rav Nachum Zev Broida, the altar's son. And on this train, wherever they were going, Rav Dessler recalls that the entire day, Rav Broida's son, Rav Nachum Zev, conducted his schedule as a normal day in yeshiva. Whatever their order of the day would be, Right now we're studying Gemara. Now we're going to do some Tehillim. Now we're going to learn some Mussar. Then we'll break for lunch. Then we have our other Gemara studies. Whatever it was, exactly to the T, exactly what they did in yeshiva, they did on the train. That was a sort of this disciplined, honed and confident approach that every day we're doing something important. This is the way we should be doing it. This is the way we do it wherever we are, and that's our thing. It was said about Kelm that if someone were to leave a pencil on a particular window ledge or a stender, you could come back 17 years later and be in the same spot, because everyone would say, okay, that is where it's supposed to be. Somebody put it there for a reason. It was everything had a set schedule, a set, everything had a framework. There was a rotation, maybe the first Toranut program. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Toranut, but in certain yeshivot in Israel, Yeshivat Hezder, they switch off rotations of who does Shmirah or who does the dishes or who does all these different things. They had one of the first Toranut rotations in the Kelm. It was considered a tremendous honor to dust the floor of the Beis Medrash in Kelm. You have the opportunity to work on yourself, to benefit others, to wipe the floors, to clean the bathrooms. This was like gold. I mean, we're talking about the highest honor. I'm not being sarcastic here. That was given out. I don't know, this I can't say, but at Simchas Torah, as opposed to the dancing around with the Torahs, they gave out, okay, I'm going to wash the toilets 3 days a week. Okay, I don't know, that I'm making up. But it was a huge honor. It was a tremendous honor to serve the community, to give back. And I mentioned a little bit about this with Rabbi Yisrael Salanter's approach to Mussar. They also fine-tune this approach of intellectually prompted emotional responsiveness. Intellectually prompted emotional responsiveness. They have an idea. They know that this is the right approach, similar to Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky's story. He knew he had to visit his wife. He had this obligation, and then he obviously had a tremendous amount of emotion that he was sharing with this fellow, but it had an intellectual basis, and he was emotionally connected to those ideas. And that's why they were so powerful and so successful, because there was a foundation, intellectual foundation, and they then built an emotional connection and value system and an honor system. There was a tremendous amount of kavod, of honor in a good way in Kelm. It was like, you're not going to seek lower sorts of activities because we're in Kelm. This is Kelm. This is what we are about. And it's a certain connection that, feeling proud, in a sense, is an emotional connection to intellectual principles. So I feel good. I feel proud to be who I am because I have a foundation, an intellectual foundation. But part of that positivity and that sense of confidence is an emotional state. And they had this emotional connection that they built through the activities they did. There was no shamish, there was no janitor, custodial worker. They all, basically contributed. I do have it in my notes. I wrote this down. This is probably from Rabbi Goldberg's book. I do have in my notes that they auctioned off their jobs on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, they auctioned off the jobs of sweeping, of cleaning, of all these things. I mentioned to you that in Kelm, they had secular studies. Now I'll mention two things. There were two things that were very controversial about Kelm. The first, as you could imagine, was the fact that they emphasized the study of Mussar. Some biographers write, I think this is incorrect, but they write that they spend most of the time studying Mussar and very little time on Gemara. I think that was what people were saying about them. The anti-Mussar camps were saying they're just wasting all their time. They're just davening all day. They're just learning these ethical works. But where are they? They're not really learning Gemara. They're not really learning halacha. I think that they did do a lot of Mussar study, but my impression from the level of the caliber of the people who came out of it, Rav Yerucham Levovitz, we're talking about the Mashgiach of Mir Yeshiva, Rav Dessler, these were people who had a tremendous amount of Talmudic knowledge. I don't imagine that they didn't study any Gemara or very little. I think they studied a lot of everything. And another thing that was controversial is they not only did they study Jewish sources, they studied secular sources. And if you see in source number 3 in your source sheet, In the English translation to strive for to Michtav Melio, which is strive for truth, Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, who was a student of Rav Dessler, writes he calls it a brief biography. He writes in Gruben, which is the Talmud Torah of Kelm. As I mentioned, it started in the younger ages. Besides for a full program of Talmudic learning, you see a full program of Talmudic learning, the curriculum also included Russian language and other secular studies, which he, the author of Kelm, considered essential for the education of businessmen's sons who would have to communicate with non-Jewish world around them. Okay. In accordance with the principles laid down by Rav Simcha Zisro, the boy, he's referring to Rav Dessler, his courses of study included Russian language and elementary mathematics. His reading also included some selected classics of world literature in the Russian language. And there's another piece, which I don't cite over here. There's another piece in the book where Rav Dessler argues for a position which seems to be very similar to a Kantian approach to the, I believe, the Nekudas HaBechira theory of the point of choice, without getting into all the details, but it has a very Kantian-esque feel to it. And Rabbi Carmel writes that he's not sure, he doesn't know, he believes that Rabbi Dessler did not read Kant. However, he says he heard this from sources in the family, that Rav Daniel Mavshevitz, who was the father-in-law, if I'm not mistaken, he's the father-in-law of Rav Dessler. I can look back. That sounds wrong. He was related. I have to look back how he was related. He knew Kant by heart. So it's very possible that that knowledge made its way through Rav Mavshevitz to Rav Dessler. But either way, it's something that is not usually promoted. It is not in the Hebrew edition of Michtav Melio. It's only in the English edition. It has not yet been censored out, but it's definitely something which some people feel uncomfortable about. And even Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said about the author of Kelm that he entrusted Rav Simcha Zissel with leading the proper balance of all these different studies, and he didn't trust other people. And eventually the Talmud Torah in Kelm, without the leadership of Rav Simcha Zissel, did not really continue. So it was sort of, it's important, but it was sort of a unique period in history where they were able to accomplish both study of Russian literature and Gemara and Mussar, obviously. We could talk a lot more about that if you're interested. Rabbi J.J. Schachter has an article about it, but we'll just move on to teaching from the author of Kelm, and I think it's just helpful to understand his general educational philosophy from seeing his actual words. So I have a piece here. It's a translation from Rabbi Hillel Goldberg, and this is a piece from Chachma U'Mussar, source number 4. One of the major themes of the author of Kelm's educational philosophy was, as I mentioned, sharing the burden. As everyone pitched in, everyone rotated. It wasn't just a one shot in the dark type of thing. There was, where's the source sheet? I can post it again. There, post it again in the chat. If you click the chat, the link in the chat, you should be able to pick up the source sheet. Okay, you got it, Shmuel? Okay. So it wasn't just a one-time thing or a one particular value they had. It was a very core belief of their yeshiva, was this idea of nosei b'olam chaveiro, of sharing the burden, of feeling that the burden of contributing to the public and the bigger picture. And it was a theme throughout his writings. It's actually Jeffrey Clausen has a book. I wasn't able to access all of the book, but I was able to see some of the book, and it's actually entitled "Sharing the Burden." Sharing the Burden, Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv and the Path of Mussar. So he published that in 2015. This was a basic theme of Rabbi Simcha Zissel's thought, and I want to just read this for you. This is a translation. This is what he writes: "The person who cares nothing for others cares nothing for himself." That's sort of what he said. Then he develops that idea further. What does that mean? Obviously, if I care for others, there's two different ideas. Caring for others and caring for myself are two different things. But he argues that no, we're all connected. We're all part of a bigger picture. And he says agricultural and economic burdens, for example, can only be met jointly. And this is a, I think, perfect concept for a Shemitah year, right? We're in a Shemitah year this year. And the idea of Shemitah is once every 7 years, we are really reminded that we're all in this together, right? If we're living in the land of Israel, living in a society where we need each other, and we need to move away from this model of givers and takers, right? There are some people who have means, and there are people who don't have means. In a sense, the people who don't have means are reliant on others to give. And in a sense, it's not an equal playing field. What Shemitah does is Shemitah eliminates all those barriers. And what Shemitah says is all of the fields are really owned by Hashem. All of the means that every person has are given to them by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, one of the fascinating halachos of Shemitah is that you don't give Truma and Meiser from Shemitah. Because Truma and Meiser is only when it's my land, and then I give a portion to the Kohen, I give a portion to the poor. If it's everybody's land, then it's really a partnership. It's really, and the halacha is clear on this. If someone damages Shemitah fields, someone steals and does improper actions with Shemitah fruit, it's not hefker. It's not that he's stealing from nobody. It's not that it's ownerless. It's that it's owned by everybody. It's owned by the entire people. Anybody owns, it's all a partnership. And what Shemitah really is reminding us is that we're all in this together. We all need to understand that nobody should be left behind. Everybody should be supported as much as we can and shared together. And that's what the Shemitah year reminds us, that really everything comes from Hashem. And it's not like I really am in charge of, I'm the arbiter of my assets. It's not the case. We need to look at ourselves as sort of a cog in the bigger, what is it? A cog in the wheel, a wheel in the cog. What's the phrase? I don't know what the phrase is. Brian, looks like you know it.
Cog in the wheel.
Cog in the wheel. Okay, we got it right. Okay. So I apologize for the tangent, but here's his point that agricultural and economic burdens can only be met jointly. We understand that. We understand that in order to have a functional economy, you can't just have individuals. You need a cohesive market. You need a structure. You need, if one business is not regulated and it goes out of control, that's going to affect other things. And we know the same thing with ecology. If one species gets out of control, different species are going to die. Everybody's interconnected on a deeper level. And he says the same is true for spiritual things. So I'll just read the whole quote because I think it's fantastic. Farmers harvest so that others may eat, but they themselves profit. Merchants sell that others benefit, but they themselves profit. People who care for others care for themselves. In other words, I know that if I'm helping someone else, if I'm giving them a product, I'm also gaining. So it's a win-win situation. Obviously, there are more complex models in business, but he's just trying to make a point that on a very basic level, in a good, proper economic system, everybody's sort of gaining from the situation. And the opposite, people who do not care for others endanger themselves. People who shoulder no burden in society weaken the system upon which they themselves depend, so much that some people are forbidden to live among others. Their selfishness is life-threatening. Interdependence on the material level is even more indispensable on the spiritual level. It's just that people have an instinctive understanding of interdependence on the material level. We understand just very much that we need a bigger system to have a thriving economic structure. But we also believe that this world is sort of a parallel to the spiritual world. And therefore, he says, Hashem created the material world as he did, that we may extrapolate from it the principle of spiritual interdependence. If we understand that everybody needs everyone else on a physical level, then that means, in a sense, that we need everybody else on a spiritual level. It's not just, okay, my block, my shul, my community, the Jewish people. No, every single person that exists in this world is here for a reason. And we have to understand that we may not see exactly how we're connected, but we're all connected. And I mean, this is was so clear during COVID, and it's so clear during this age of globalization. Everybody is connected. And when things are thriving in one country, it doesn't mean that they could sort of close their eyes and shut out the world. Every country, every community, every single person in a deeper way, not only physically, but he's saying even spiritually, are connected. And this idea, he writes actually explicitly, spiritual progress is dependent upon nurturing it in others. If you want to grow, this is what, again, Rabbi Shmuel Kamenetsky, what he was doing. He was helping someone else with their shalom bayis. By doing that, he was growing in his shalom bayis. You can't just think about yourself. When you have a greater understanding of the values and the importance of how important, if I believe davening is so important, so then obviously, not in a arrogant way and not in your face way, but obviously I want to share that with somebody else. If I believe in health, if I'm a big health nut and I'm being all healthy, I'm trying to eat well, obviously I'm going to try to share that with the people who I love and share that with them. So the idea is the world around us needs us and we need the world around us. And to sort of place this distinction, it's a fascinating thing that Kelm was able to teach this, because they were this small cadre of intellectually capable and unique school of thought, but they were understanding that we have to build this appreciation for the rest of the world. It's not just us on a mountaintop forgetting about everybody else. They say that when anyone would visit or come as a new student into Kelm, everyone would come and greet them and carry their bags and how are you? It's so great to see you. And it was just, everybody was working on their own appreciation of others and the importance of others, and practically trying to build those connections and those relationships. It was really almost a fanaticism that the Alter had about social responsibility. If he saw a student that was not sort of, getting with the program, if it was in his studies, okay, it's not really, maybe he would have forgiveness. If it was that he's not going to contribute to this rotation, he doesn't see what we're trying to do over here, he would not have so much patience for that. We all have to chip in. We all have to provide. We all have to, rotate, sweeping the floor and cleaning up. That is fundamental. I wanted to share one thing that I experienced in yeshiva in Greater Washington in Silver Spring. If you want to go all the way back, the Rosh Yeshiva of Aaron Lopiansky's father-in-law, Rabbi Nathan Tzvi, Rabbi Finkel. Rabbi Nathan Tzvi was his brother-in-law. Rabbi Finkel, the Rosh Yeshiva of Mir. So again, like I said, it is connected to both Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz and the Alter of Slobodka through family. They're both Finkels. So there is a sort of a Mussar school connection. But even without that particular connection of the Finkel family, I felt that there was a lot of Mussar that was being taught in Yeshiva Gedol of Silver Spring. And one particular example, which about the sharing of the burden, I'll just share with you, that I spent a Purim there. And usually in Yeshiva, you don't have family, it's kind of a time people let loose on their different levels, and hopefully, right? But it's sort of a time that many Yeshiva Bachrim let loose. And I remember before Purim, Rav Lopiansky announced to the students, he said, on Purim, we as a kahila, as a yeshiva, we want the Bachrim to raise money for the yeshiva. We want the Bachrim to feel once a year, he said, we don't ask you to raise money. We don't ask you to contribute. We have fundraisers. We do that for you. But once a year, I want you to feel part of everything that we're doing here. And I want you to go around, as opposed to just indulging yourself. He didn't say it in those words, but I understood what he was saying. Instead of having that Purim, that, the yeshiva Purim, that you're just going wild. And he said, I want you to raise money, to going around collecting. And that's what we did. We dressed up and we had fun. It wasn't like, all, it wasn't so solemn and everything, but we went around, we raised money. And I think it was an exercise that he was trying to let us know, if you're studying in yeshiva, if you are taking time with whatever you're doing, somebody's putting the check up for you. Somebody, whoever it is, maybe it's your parents, maybe not, maybe it's someone else, somebody's paying for you to be able to study here. So have appreciation for that. And the least you can do is to contribute in a small way. We value you. We want there to be Torah study. We understand it. However, it's not for free. This is not a freebie. People are sacrificing for you. And I thought that was just a tremendous message of understanding that we're all connected. We're all connected, and we all have to see ourselves as part of the community means that we're part of a bigger picture. This is a sad story, but I do feel that it's important to share. Maybe I'll save it for, I don't know if I want to save it for last. I won't save it for last because then I'll feel really sad at the end. So I'll tell you now. It's one of the most impactful stories I've ever heard, really ever heard ever. And it's about the unfortunate, basically destruction or murder of the Kelm students in 1941. So I've seen two different versions. I'll just tell you the version that I heard from Rabbi Aaron Lopiansky. Rabbi Hillel Goldberg does have in his book, The Fire Within, he does record the same story basically. But the story goes as follows. They have some survivors from this story, obviously, or else we wouldn't know about it. And the following story was when the Lithuanians were asked by the Germans to round up the yeshivas, and they gladly did. And in 1941, they basically rounded up Rav Daniel Mavshevitz, who I mentioned to you as the leader, the head of the Kelm Beis HaTalmud, and the Lithuanians said to him, you have a moment to speak to your students before you're all dead. And as though Rav Mavshevitz was delivering a regular Mussar shmooze in the yeshiva, he got up, no hysterics, no anxiety, gave a Mussar shmooze about the value of Kiddush Hashem, the value of making Kiddush Hashem. And he recounted that on Tisha B'Av, we say the Asara Haruge Malchus, the 10 people who were killed as martyrs. And on Yom Kippur, we also mention it. And it says on Yom Kippur, we say the same type of recounting of those 10. And it says that when the Malachim started to say to Hashem, Zu Torah v'zu schara, this is the Torah, these are the Torah scholars, and this is what the reward they get. And Hashem says, if I hear one more kol, everything is going to be back. I'm going to turn the world back into tohu, back into nothingness. And Rav Daniel asks, what's the pshat? Why would Hashem send the world back into nothingness? And he said, this is what he said in the Shmuz. He said, it's the opposite. It's the other way around. The world was in a situation where there was no zechus kiyum. There was no, when Hashem had to have these 10 martyrs killed, the world was in a situation where it did not have any right to exist anymore. If there wouldn't be the atonement of these 10 righteous tzaddikim, they didn't die, the world would have been gone back to tohu, would have gone back to nothing. And Hashem was saying, if you stop this from happening, then the world is going to go back to tohu vavohu. I'm going to have to restart the entire world, because the kapara of these tzaddikim dying will give the world a future. It will give the world a chance to redeem itself. And Rav Daniel said to his students standing at their deaths, the same situation is for us today. He said, in 1941, the Nazis are all over the world. Stalin is obviously wicked, and Hitler is awful. Everybody, they're all wicked. And the good people in the world are doing paperwork, right? The good people in America, no, we can't, the quotas and this and that, and they're all busy with bureaucracy. In Hashem, if you looked at the world right now, would say the world must go back to tohu vavohu. The world must be destroyed. If it wasn't for us giving up our lives, al kiddush Hashem, and saying that we know that there's a bigger picture, we will give atonement to all the evils of this world. And he said that the world must go on. There must be a kiyum for the world. And Rabbi Lopiansky ended, this is what he said on Tisha B'Av one year, and he said, the type of person that Rav Daniel Mavshevitz was that in the depths of hell, he was saying the world, he was able to be big enough to say there has to be a future. There has to be a future to this world, even though there is so much going wrong right now. But he said, we represent the future of the world. That's what it means to have a Kiddush Hashem, to die for a higher purpose. And that's going to atone for the world's evils, which will give us a future in the world. Small people would have said the world should end. The world is over. There's no reason for the world to continue. But he was able to say there's a future. And with that, Rav Daniel finishes his Mussar Shmuz, and he turns to either the Germans or Lithuanians, and he said, I'm finished now. Now you can continue. And he handed it over to them, and they were all murdered. Besides for, I guess, a survivor or two, whatever it was that they told this story. With this story, I mean, it's a very painful story, but we see the values and ideals of Kelm in this story. Sort of that discipline that we obviously have nothing, we cannot survive this, but we need to use that opportunity to remind ourselves, what is our job right now? What do we do when we have a few minutes to live? And he spoke about this idea, what he felt historically was happening, how he felt he could inspire his students, and with confidence, and again, without any hysterics, disciplined, gave a Mussar Shmuz, spoke to his students, and then said, I'm finished speaking now. Now you can begin. And that's just an incredible, words can't, I'm at a loss of words, honestly. It's an incredible, feat of discipline. So I promised I wouldn't end with that story. So I'll just tell you a few other things about Kelm. As I mentioned, Rav Simcha Zissel Ziv or Broide, he was the Rebbe of Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, not the previous Rosh Hashiva of the Mir. Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel was originally, I don't know if he was the first Nosson Tzvi, but we'll call him the Nosson Tzvi the first. The Nosson Tzvi the first became the Alter of Slobodka. And as we'll discuss, he was instrumental in the promulgation of Mussar Yeshivos in Slobodka and throughout the world. Many of his students became great leaders in North America. There is really a short list, not even a short list, it's a pretty long list, but when I mean a short list, it's a very high quality list of the alumni, the great illustrious alumni of the Kelm Yeshiva. I'll just tell you a few of them. We have Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, studied in Kelm. He became one of the major Israeli Rosh Hashivas, the author of the Even HaAzel. Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein, the Rosh Hashiva of Slobodka and later Hebron. Rav Naftali Trupp, Rosh Hashiva in Radin. Rav Yosef Lee Bloch, Rosh Hashiva in Telz. As I mentioned, Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Alter of Slobodka. Rav Yosef Yozel Horowitz, who we will talk about in the future. He was the Alter of Navardik. Rav Elia Lapyan, who was a modern, called modern, but contemporary Mussar leader and Rosh Hashiva in Kfar Hasidim in Israel. And Rav Dessler, which we'll talk, let's maybe end the shir tonight with talking a little bit about Rav Dessler. The focus on Rav Dessler, the focus in Kelm was producing individuals, as I mentioned, these quality individuals that remained these ideals and models of discipline and purity of soul. And Rav Dessler remained true to his roots in Kelm throughout his entire life. He did go in different areas. He started the gates at Kollel, and then he moved to Panovich, but he was always, could be defined as part of that school of Kelm. Large and many were not words that were very valued in Kelm. Quality was not about the numbers, it was about the quality. And for Kelm, it was really about this special cadre, not in a, as we mentioned, not in a gaivadik way, not in a haughty way, but sort of this quality of a group of students that strove for perfection. I'll just share with you something that this is in another Jonathan Rosenblum book called Rav Dessler, the biography of Rav Dessler, and he quotes a poem that it seems that Rav Dessler wrote, if I'm not mistaken. I'll read it to you. If I'm not mistaken, this is from, so it's a poem, he calls it a poem, but it's in Michtav Eliyahu in volume 3. He says that it's entitled La'atzmi, to myself. To myself I record in order that I can review the truth that I saw. I guard it and remember it. Is this guarding for myself not the outgrowth of self-love? He's asking himself, like, I'm writing this down in order to work on myself. Does that not mean that I'm so self-centered, so, focused on who I am? That's not a proper approach in Mussar. That is what the superficial view claims. So he's saying, no. It's not wrong to work on oneself. The true view is, if my heart does not learn, how will it teach? Only that which goes out from the heart overflowing its banks, can enter the heart of another. So he's saying primarily we have to try to enter the hearts of others. But if we don't have inspiration, if we don't have self-love, if we don't feel good about ourselves, if we're not actively working internally on ourselves, then we're not going to be able to impact other people. But it's all with the goal of not focusing on yourself, of not making your own. There is a quotation people say, your own life is the greatest artwork you will ever create. It's a beautiful idea, but we can't just think of ourselves as artwork and forget about the rest of the world. We have to remember our lives are our greatest pieces of art. We are all masterpieces. And that's true. But we're a piece of the painting. We're a piece of a greater structure. We have to remember that. And that's what Rav Dessler was saying to himself in this poem, that la'atzmi, I'm to myself, but I'm really to myself in order so that I should be able to impact other people. I think that in many ways, we've lost this sense of regalness, of confidence, in Yiddish, we'd call it stolz. I don't know if anyone, it's sort of a stolz. They carry themselves with a certain, I'm not going to sing lower than that. And that's sort of that legacy, which I think in a way we've lost. I think we live in a society where that's really not very much approved of. People just, talk to me, just be, down to earth, it's okay, rabbi, this idea that Kelm produced is a little bit foreign to us, but I think we can appreciate in our own lives building that self-confidence and building that honor in a good way, that kavod, that we really should feel, not that or if we do the wrong thing, it's so bad and there's so much, there's so much punishment and all that. We want to, especially for children, we want to give respect. We want to show respect to both ourselves and our children in educational models and in our families and in general in the community. Show respect, and then people will feel elevated and they will feel empowered to do the right thing, as opposed to the sort of the other approach, which is just rebuke and pushing and fire and brimstone. Kelm built up their students. They built up a sort of approach with confidence, and then they felt empowered to live by those values and to continue. Thank you everyone for joining us. That's all I have. Anyone, I'm open to questions if anyone has, but that is the conclusion of our segment on the first generation students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, specifically of Simcha Zissel, Broida, the Alter of Kelm. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will continue next week. Oh, Shmuel, yeah, okay. We will continue next week at 8:30, God willing, and I will decide if we're going to do Slobodka or Navardik. I'm not sure. Maybe Navardik, even though it's a little out of order. We'll see. But we'll do another school of Mussar.
Thank you very much.
Have a great night, everyone.
Yasher koach. Excellent share. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You.
Sure.
Have a good night, everyone.